Welcome to Everyday Enlightenment. I'm your host, Patty Teal. My guest today is Nurie Stearns. She will be a presenter at a retreat put on by PESI, which will take place September 22nd through the 25th at Sedona Mago Retreat, Center for Spiritual Awakening. PESI, spelled P-E-S-I, is the leader in continuing education seminars, conferences, in-house training, webcasts, and products for mental health professionals. Mary has over 35 years of professional experience in mental health and maintains a counseling practice in Tulsa, Oklahoma. An advanced level yoga teacher and mindfulness student, she is a longtime yoga practitioner and meditator. Mary is the author of numerous articles on psychospiritual growth, author of Yoga for Anxiety, Yoga for Emotional Trauma, and Yoga Mind, Peaceful Mind, and co-editor of Soulful Living. She was also the former editor of Personal Transformation magazine and has produced audio CDs on the healing practice of mindfulness and compassion and DVDs on yoga for emotional trauma and anxiety. Mary teaches yoga, mindfulness and meditation, teaches seminars across the United States, and co-leads with her husband transformational meditation and yoga retreats. She herself has suffered from anxiety and emotional trauma and credits mindfulness practice for profound personal transformation. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Patty.
I've been very much looking forward to talking to you and getting some advice that I will take very personally, I think.
Well, there's so much advice that comes from yoga and mindfulness that there's plenty of it for all of us, I think.
Absolutely. So, Mary, what are the benefits of going to a yoga and or a meditation retreat?
I was thinking this morning, having just come back from a small vacation, about the benefits of vacation, which are getting out of the house, or getting away from jobs, and away from housework, yard work, projects, responsibilities. And when we're on vacation, we tend to be, especially in this country, we tend to be very active. We have a lot of stuff to do. We have places to go. We don't want to miss a thing. And so while it's a wonderful breakaway, for many of us, a lot of the times, it tends to be really busy. When we go to a retreat, however, we have the benefits that most of us are familiar with from vacations of leaving our responsibilities behind. But rather than occupying ourselves with the beauty of the outer world or activities or adventures, we occupy ourselves with the beauty of our inner world, because in retreat we literally slow down. And when we slow down, we meet ourselves. It's a little like the difference between going to the lake on a really windy day, and the water's really, the waves are large, and the trees are blowing on the shore, and there's a lot of energy moving, and it tends to energize us and distract us from our inner world.
Well, that is
like a vacation.
Right, that is beautifully said. So when you come back from a retreat, you're less likely to need a vacation from your vacation, which it sometimes feels like when you're so busy on a vacation.
Yes, because in retreat, it's like being at the lake when there's no wind, and it's very, very calm. And when the lake is calm, the sediments settle to the bottom, and you can see into the water more clearly. And when we're on retreat, because it is quiet and quieting, it invites us to quiet on the inside, where we can meet ourselves in really lovely ways and make friends with ourselves again.
I'm going to have to go to your website and get some of your meditation CDs. Just when you're speaking, I feel myself totally relaxing to the sound of your voice and the visualizations that you name as you're just describing the retreat. Is it important or is it helpful to spend time in silence?
It is, and for some of us, there's discomfort initially with silence. In fact, we've had a lot of people say, I couldn't do a retreat. I'm afraid of the silence. And then they sign up. And I can't say universally, but the vast majority of the time people say, it was so much easier than I thought. And what makes us afraid of silence sometimes is that there's things inside us we want to avoid, or there's memories, or there's thoughts, or we're just not familiar with silence. What actually happens, though, is that silence is like the lake when there's no wind, and everything settles inside, and we meet peaceful parts of ourselves, and we meet loving parts of ourselves, and our bodies relax. Silence in that way is a very, very powerful, loving healer. But because some of us are afraid of silence, it really can be very useful to do it in retreat with a group of people. You're with people, you have the support of other people, and it makes the initial exposure to silence much more friendly and much more doable.
That's very interesting. And I've heard a lot about the monkey mind, where it's going all over the place. And if you don't judge yourself and you just kind of become the observer, that can be a helpful process for a beginner as well. Is that correct?
Yes, in actually wonderful ways. Because when we quiet down and maybe get a little education about the monkey mind, neuroscientists call it the default network of the mind.
Oh, that sounds much more official.
It's useful to have an official title because it normalizes it. It's like, this is something, the default network of the mind. This is something we all experience. And so it's not unique to me. But when we get quiet or meditate and begin to be the observer of thought that come and go, some discoveries are made. And one of them is that if we can observe our thoughts are not who we are. And if we can watch thoughts come and go, then we see that they're really transient, and who we are surely isn't that transient. And so learning to be the observer of thoughts is so darn relieving because it helps us learn to pull back. It helps us literally with the inner eye look at our thoughts rather than being under the spell of our thoughts. And for myself and a lot of other people, that is like a miracle to be able to pull back and say, I just was snagged again by a thought. I went for a ride with that thought, but I can pull back. And so meditating is deceivingly simple, but not so easy, because when we meditate, we do tend to get pulled by our thoughts. And the next thing we say, I was supposed to be here meditating and watching my breath or resting in quiet or saying a mantra or whatever we're doing in meditation. And the next thing, we're going for a ride. You're like, what's the deal here? And so pretty soon we come to awareness and we say, wait, pull back and refocus on the breath. In doing so, again, we detach from our thoughts and have the realization that who we are as sentient beings, as human beings, can't be reduced to pesky thoughts. That's really good news.
Yes, it is. So did you just describe mindfulness, or is that something different?
Mindfulness is one of those terms that's become like as universally used as the word stress. And so it's taken on a lot of different meanings. I like to stay with a real simple definition of mindfulness, which is a practice of non-judgmental observing of what's arising. And so that means hanging back, having like an anchor, like the breath, for example, that we keep coming home to. And then from that home, or from that observation, watching what's going on around us, including, and in big part, watching our thoughts. But mindfulness can take other definitions as well. There can be concentration mindfulness, like paying attention to what we're eating, or paying attention to walking, or paying attention to a yoga pose. So there's mindfulness that is that non-judgmental observing of whatever's going on, and there's mindfulness which is paying attention on purpose to something specific that we're doing.
And can it help us to take care of painful emotions?
Well, painful emotions are what keeps therapists in business. I don't like painful emotions, and I don't know many people who do like painful emotions. And so there's a real natural tendency to avoid them. I'm not going to think about that right now, or I'm going to say, no, I'm not really feeling that way, or I'm just going to get busy and distract myself with something else, all which are real understandable ways of dealing with painful emotions. However, when we do that, the energy of those painful emotions just goes underground and acts on us in less conscious ways. And so it's much more beneficial to make friends with our emotions, to approach our emotions rather than avoid our emotions. And so in order to do that, number one, we have to be mindful, which is non-judgmental awareness of what's arising, which includes being aware of what we're feeling. Because remember, if our tendency is to push them away, then our awareness can be hazy or fuzzy. But when we pay attention on purpose, then we know when we're anxious. We can know when we're upset or know when we're sad or angry. So that's one way that mindfulness helps. Another way is, if we go back to the definition, non-judgmental awareness of what's arising, then we recognize that there's the me who is aware, or me who is observing, and the me who is having these emotions. And in putting a little more of our attention on the me who is observing, or the act of observing, we actually have a little space inside. So there might be the hurt feeling, but we're not snagged so strongly by it. We can observe it, and by observing it, we can then take care of it, like breathe through it. So many times I've said to myself, breathe, Mary, breathe. And I've said that many times to clients and students.
And I imagine people who cannot face or do not learn to face it, they run the danger of distracting themselves, and sometimes in not very healthy ways.
Yeah. One of the phrases that I used for myself and in seminars and retreats is, do not leave yourself alone with your suffering, which means, and we're talking painful emotions, which means, here's Mary, I'll use my own name, being anxious, since that has been more my Achilles heel. When I'm upset, it tends to be more into anxiety than anger or sadness. So here's Mary, who's anxious. If I totally get snagged into that, then there's just Mary anxious, and I am disempowered. I can't take care of it. I can't make choice to respond to the anxiety. But if I bring in the ability to be aware, or Mary the observer, and say, oh, that's anxiety again, now I'm in relationship with it. There's the anxiety, and there's awareness of anxiety. Now I'm mindful, and now I have choice. If it's just Mary with the anxiety, I'm snagged, I'm disempowered, and don't have choice. But if I am aware of the anxiety, I have choice. Thank goodness among all the species, we humans have more choice than any other species. It's part of our prefrontal lobe, it's part of our advanced brain, but there's no choice without awareness. And so now that I have choice, then I can learn ways to comfort myself and soothe my distress and lovingly mother my way, and teach my clients and students to lovingly mother their way through painful emotions.
And can yoga also help?
Yoga can help. Let's go there, but I want to talk a little bit more about mothering our way through painful emotions.
Okay.
When a toddler is distressed, a toddler is totally ensnared in that distress, and the toddler does not have the ability to emotionally regulate him or himself. He's just at the mercy of distress. And it, not unlike us sometimes, right, as adults.
Mm-hmm.
But for a toddler, it takes loving mother, father to hold the child. Soothing touch helps contain painful emotion. It takes loving mother, father to kiss the child and say they're there. It takes kind words from loving mother, father, and then it takes a choice. Then mother, loving parent. If the child's hurt physically, they put a Band-Aid on the child, get care, and otherwise they make a choice to distract the child or to re-engage the child in something that's more positive. And mindfulness teaches us to do that with ourselves when we're upset. I think that's been one of the biggest gifts that I've learned from mindfulness, is how to mother myself through my suffering and how to teach my clients to mother themselves. I say mother because I'm a woman, also because of the archetypal mother of being the nurturer.
If you've just tuned in, my guest today is Nurie Stearns, who will be a presenter at a retreat put on by PESI, which will take place September 22nd through the 25th at Sedona Mago Retreat Center for Spiritual Awakening.
So then back to how yoga heals anxiety and the importance of including the body and the mind in calming worry and decreasing anxiety. Body and mind are one, scientifically now, we know that. And so when the mind is freaking out, like, oh no, I can't do this, or oh my God, what's happening? The body responds in kind, and the body goes into fight, flight, or freeze response. And if there's been chronic or severe trauma, what we now know through science is that unless we work that revved upness out of the body, it becomes a fixed state or a permanent state, and so we see ongoing anxiety as well as physical health problems with heart problems and digestive problems, etc. So to really treat anxiety and or trauma, we have to teach the body how to relax. Yoga is now evidence-based mainstream treatment for anxiety and trauma because of how it works it out of the body and teaches the body how to relax again. Body calms down and the mind gets quiet. And at the same time, when the mind gets quiet, it does begin to calm the body down because they because they so profoundly impact each other. But with anxiety and or trauma, because it does live in the body, the treatment does need to include calming the body, working with breath, working with simple poses, working with simple movements to retrain the body how to relax and to feel safe again.
Does this take very long for someone to learn who hasn't had any experience with it?
You know, there was a recent study, I think it was done last year, that took a group of women who did not respond to traditional psychotherapy and treatment of trauma, and they stopped all treatment, and they put them in, I believe it was an 8-week program of yoga. And at the end of the 8 weeks, and so they compared symptomology prior and at the end of the 8 weeks, and there was a kind of a surprising and significant reduction in symptomatology of post-traumatic stress after 8 weeks. These are women who were conventional therapy failed them.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
That's pretty interesting data.
It's very interesting. So, psychologists, psychiatrists, what will be the group that you'll be speaking to at Sedona Mago Retreat? I know they're mental health professionals. Is that a very broad term that includes a lot of professions?
It includes a lot of professions. It'll be psychologists, marriage and family therapists, licensed counselors, so master's and PhD level clinicians. There may be some psychiatrists. There tend not to be as many psychiatrists at the seminars that PESI puts out. Generally, they're more for those who are doing the counseling treatment. But at the retreat, this is the first time PESI is doing a retreat, which is so awesome.
Oh.
PESI is truly, they are the leader in providing seminars and training for mental health professionals. And this is the first time they're taking this into a retreat format. And so I think that's really terrific. And the response has been amazing. The retreat sold out. I mean, in a couple of months, there's a waiting list to get on the retreat, and they've scheduled 2 more retreats.
Well, isn't that wonderful?
It's amazing. So there's definitely interest in learning this approach to healing, and equally important, experience the need ourselves as mental health professionals.
Absolutely, because as you know, all the health professionals, and in particular, I would imagine mental health professionals, can be under a lot of stress.
Yes. And many of us are caretakers in our personality, right, as well as professional caretakers. And so many of us are really adept at taking care of others, not perhaps as adept at taking care of ourselves. And so to have some time to just focus on ourselves is wonderful. And focus on ourselves in this way where we get trained in these approaches to healing, but also experience them ourselves, really makes believers out of us.
Absolutely.
Because we see the benefit ourselves.
And the reason I specifically asked about psychiatrists is it seems it would be wonderful if, and I'm sure there are some that do it, but many of them just prescribe medication rather than integrating some of the kinds of things that you're talking about. And I hope that our medical field will eventually progress in that direction so that it will be more of a mind-body approach.
Yeah. Well, at some of the larger programs at Mayo, at Harvard, as well as many, many others, they now have integrative services. I have read treatment and discharge summaries from Mayo Clinics for people some of my clients who have had treatment there, and they're getting mindfulness programs, and they're in yoga programs. And so while the psychiatrists aren't leading those groups, they're definitely prescribing those groups and those approaches to the patient populations, which I think is terrific.
Oh, I do too. So things are moving in a good direction in that regard.
Things are moving. Well, and it is evidence-based now, which is necessary. I mean, we have a responsibility to utilize evidence-based protocols, and so there's much more license for psychiatrists to prescribe this now.
You know, Mary, all our lives have their ups and downs, and we all have things that we have to cope with. But when it comes down to it, we all want to be happy. Is this something that can be cultivated?
You know, learning that happiness can be cultivated turned my life around. I did not know it. Honestly, for me, happiness was something that happened on a good day.
Right.
And it wasn't something that I had a lot of responsibility or capacity to generate. But through mindfulness trainings, I've learned that happiness depends more on my ability to pay attention to what's already available in the present moment that can make me happy, which we'll talk about in a moment, and to make that choice to focus on what's available. When I teach my yoga classes, oftentimes we'll start after we do some breathing and some little meditation and kind of setting the inner focus. We'll stand up, we'll go into mountain pose, and I'll have everyone lift their toes and stretch their toes and then press their toes back to the floor and then say, "Good morning, my darling toes. I'm so glad you're here." And we all say that together. And we all smile in recognition that having toes is something to be very happy about. And I say, someday some of us might not have toes. And many of us know someone who does not have toes. You can still be very happy without toes. That's not the point. But to pay attention to what's available to be happy about is a very, very powerful teaching.
Oh, that's so cute.
And so there's always something.
Right. I think I mentioned to you, Mary, that I have produced children's recordings in the past, and one of them is called the Inside Out Blessing Game, and it starts with the toes. 10 ticklish toes stand to take a bow. They all stretch up and then bend down. Wiggle, 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 squirm. One by one, they bow and turn. So it reminded me of that when you said that. But it's not just for kids; it's for all of us. And it's yes, we lose that sometimes, whereas kids find it easier. So that's wonderful. So, do you have a website where we can learn more about you? I have a feeling that there are going to be a lot of people that listen to this that want to know more about your teaching.
It's personaltransformation.com. So it's www.personaltransformation.com.
And you yourself have made CDs, I mentioned earlier. Are those to help with stress and anxiety?
They are. There's one on mindfulness for comfort and joy. And that one, I teach some songs, I teach some breathing stuff. I teach ways to help us mother ourselves with our painful emotions, to not leave ourselves alone with our suffering. And the one on mindfulness for healing and happiness is, I think, very useful for learning to relate to our thoughts and to make choices about the thoughts that we focus on without denying other thoughts. It's a tricky thing to say, I'm aware that old negative self-story has come up again. Hello, I see you. And I'm going to focus on the truth that I have a kind heart, so that there's no suppression or pushing, but there's recognition and then refocusing on something that's more life-enhancing. So that's in mindfulness for healing and happiness.
Oh, that sounds lovely and very, very helpful. Well, Mary, I so appreciate you being my guest today, and I hope that I get a chance to meet you when you're out at Sedona Mago Retreat. And thanks for sharing so much wisdom with our audience today.
Well, thank you so much, Patty.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.